Montana Territory, late spring of 1877. Dusk rolled over the dry hills like smoke, and the wind carried the scent of iron and sweat. Eleanor Elling stood barefoot in the dirt yard behind the Stark family ranch house, her wrists chained to the hitching post like an outlaw. Her arms ached, but not as much as her pride. The heavy iron cuffs bit into her skin, the rusted chain rattling every time she shifted. She was 23, stubborn as stone, and she had said no. That was all. Just one word. No, she would not marry Thomas Stark. No, she would not be bought with cattle and a title on a land deed. Thomas had not taken it kindly. The house was quiet behind her, the windows dark. The Starks had gone into town for the evening, leaving her out here like a dog because they knew no one would interfere. She was alone. Her parents had died 5 winters ago in a fever spell that tore through Helena. She had worked as a housemaid to survive, then as a cook. When Thomas offered her marriage, she had thought it was kindness. But it was ownership he wanted, not partnership. She saw it too late. Now she was chained in the yard for refusing him. A rider approached from the ridge. The hoofbeats were slow, steady, not in a rush but not aimless either. Eleanor squinted into the fading light. The figure on the horse was tall, broad-shouldered, with a worn hat pulled low and dust on his boots. He dismounted without speaking, tying his bay gelding to the fence. "Eleanor?" His voice was deep, quiet. She stiffened. "Yes." He stepped closer. She saw his face then tanned, sharp-jawed, with a scar on his left cheek and eyes the color of storm clothes. He looked about 30, maybe a little older. He knelt beside her and examined the chains. "Who did this to you?" "Thomas Stark." He nodded once, then stood. "Name's Valentine Grady. I heard about what he did in town. You came here alone?" "I did." He walked back to his horse and pulled something from the saddlebag, a long-handled bolt cutter. Eleanor's breath caught. "You plan on cutting me loose?" "I do." "Why?" He paused, looking right at her. "Because no one has the right to lock up a woman like livestock for saying no." He stepped close again, the bolt cutter clanking softly as he brought it to the chain. With a slow squeeze, the metal groaned and then snapped clean. The weight fell from her wrists, and she crumpled forward, catching herself on her hands. Before she could stand, he reached down and lifted her one arm under her knees, the other around her back, solid and sure. She gasped. "You do not have to carry me, I know." She stopped talking. Valentine carried her over his shoulder like she weighed nothing at all. Her face pressed against his shoulder, the smell of leather and dust and something faintly like pine filling her nose. He set her down gently near his horse and pulled a blanket from his saddle roll. She wrapped it around herself as he helped her mount. He swung up behind her and took the reins. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe." They rode into the night without looking back. The cabin sat tucked in a narrow valley between pine-covered hills, 10 miles north of town. Valentine helped her down and lit a fire in the small hearth. The place was simple wood floor, a table, 2 chairs, a cot against the far wall. He gave her space. While she sat near the fire, he busied himself boiling water and finding her something to eat, a tin of beans, hard bread, and a tin cup of coffee. "You live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Used to ride for cattle outfits. Then I bought this land last year. Been fixing it up slow." "You came back just to help me?" "I did not like the way people talked about it in town. Like you deserved it. Like refusing a man was a crime." She stared into the fire, her voice low. "I thought I could trust him. I thought he saw me." "I see you," Valentine said. She looked up sharply. He was sitting across from her now, elbows on his knees, looking right at her. "I see a woman who stood her ground. Who would rather be punished than owned. That is not weakness, Eleanor." She blinked fast. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while. Then she asked, "What will happen when he finds out I am gone?" "He will come looking. But you are not alone anymore." Her eyes lingered on him. Why did you really come for me? He looked away for a moment, then back at her. Because I could not stop thinking about you. She swallowed. They fell asleep in separate corners of the cabin. But the air between them had changed, no longer strangers, not yet lovers, but something had shifted. By morning, her wrists were bruised and swollen, and he wrapped them gently in cloth. She flinched at first, but he was careful, his touch steady. You planning to go back to town? He asked. No. She looked him in the eye. I have nowhere to go. You do now. She stared at him. You mean it? I do. She stood, her blanket slipping off her shoulders. I do not want to be someone's burden. You are not. His voice was firm, and something in her chest cracked open. She stepped closer. You do not owe me anything. I know. Neither moved for a long moment. Then she lifted her hand and touched the side of his face, just above the scar. I do not know what this is, she whispered. But I feel safe with you. He leaned his forehead against hers. That is all I want. Outside, the sun rose over the hills. Inside, two hearts began to heal. And for the first time in years, Eleanor smiled. The morning air held a chill that clung to the folds of Eleanor's skirt as she stepped out onto the porch. Thin light filtered through the pines, catching on dew slick needles and the smoke curling up from the chimney. She held a tin cup in both hands, warmth bleeding into her fingers from the weak brew Valentine had handed her without a word. He was across the yard now, tightening a saddle cinch, quiet in his work. She watched him from the steps, not speaking. There was something in the way he moved that calmed her, methodical, unhurried, like he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply did what needed doing. I'm not much use yet, she said, just above a whisper. He looked over his shoulder. Didn't ask you to be. I know, she said. But I'd like to help. He studied her for a long beat. There's a pile of kindling needs splitting. Axes behind the shed. She nodded, set her cup down, and walked past him without waiting to be told twice. The wood was damp and stubborn, but she found a rhythm. A swing, a crack, the weight dropping just right. Her wrists protested, wrapped neat in the linen Valentine had cut from an old shirt, but she gritted her teeth and kept on. The ache reminded her she was still here. Still herself. By mid-morning, her palms were raw and her sleeves stuck to her skin. Valentine brought her a strip of dried meat and a slice of cold biscuit, then leaned against the doorframe and watched her finish the last few logs. You always work like that? He asked. Only when I'm angry. That's so? She wiped her forehead with the back of her sleeve. Man leaves you chained to a post, you don't exactly feel like sitting still afterward. He gave a quiet huff of breath, something near a laugh but not quite. Fair enough. She sat on the step beside him and took the biscuit, chewing slow. What about you? She asked after a while. Why live all the way out here if you don't have to? He didn't answer right away. Then, spent too long taking orders from men who didn't give a damn if I came back breathing. Figured I'd rather dig fence posts on my own land than bleed for someone else's. Was it army? No, he said. Cattle wars south of the Powder River. Ranchers against homesteaders. I rode with a crew that didn't care which side paid, long as they paid. She looked at him sideways. You regretting any of it? He was quiet again, jaw working. Some things stick. She didn't press. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of things they hadn't figured out how to say yet. That night, she took the cot, and he rolled out a blanket near the hearth. She didn't argue. Her muscles ached in new places, and when she lay back, she realized she hadn't felt safe behind a door in a long time. She didn't sleep right away. The logs cracked softly in the fire. Valentine's breathing was steady, the rise and fall of it comforting in a way she couldn't explain. Did you ever want a family? She asked into the dark. His reply came after a long pause. Used to. Thought I'd have one by now. But life doesn't ask what you want. She turned toward the wall, her voice low. No. It doesn't. In the morning, she woke to the smell of cornmeal frying in lard. He had a pan over the fire, movements efficient, like he'd done it 100 times. She didn't say anything, just sat and watched him work. He handed her a plate, then sat across from her with his own. "There's a man in town," he said between bites. "Luther Hale. Keeps a ledger under the counter. If someone's hired a bounty or made claim to property, it ends up on that list. You've a right to know if Stark wrote your name in it." She tensed. "You think he would?" "I think he already has." She stared at her plate. "Then I'm not safe here." He met her eyes. "You are. But you should still see it." She nodded slowly. "I want to go." He didn't question it. Just said, "We'll ride at first light." Later, she helped him patch a broken stirrup strap, sitting close enough that their knees brushed. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. "You trust me?" he asked quietly. She didn't hesitate. "Yes." He nodded once. That was all. That evening, she found herself standing at the edge of the fenced pasture, watching the gelding flick his tail and chew at the grass. Valentine came up beside her, arms folded over the top rail. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" She glanced at him. "Someone who'd leave me where he found me." He didn't smile. Just looked out at the hills. "I've seen what happens when men look away." The wind tugged a strand of hair loose from her braid, and she didn't bother fixing it. "I'm not good at leaning on people," she said. "I'm not asking you to." She turned toward him. "But you're here anyway." "I am." She reached out and touched his hand where it rested on the rail. Just a brush of fingers. He didn't move. The sun dropped low behind the ridge, and neither of them spoke again until the last light slipped away. Tomorrow, they'd ride into town together. But tonight she stayed next to him until the stars came out. They left before the first bird call, riding out beneath a sky still bruised with night. The horses' hooves made soft thuds against the damp earth, and neither spoke for a long while. The trail bent through a narrow pass flanked by cottonwoods, their early leaves trembling in the wind. Eleanor kept her eyes ahead, the brim of her borrowed hat low, her spine straight despite the ache that curled beneath her ribs. Valentine rode beside her, quiet but not absent. Every so often, he glanced her way not to check her pace, but to make sure she was still choosing it. "Town's about a half-hour yet," he said, voice level. She gave a small nod. "Have you been back since you brought me out?" "No, think anyone recognize you?" "Doesn't matter if they do." Eleanor didn't answer. She tightened her grip on the reins and felt the stiffness in her fingers, new skin trying to mend where the cuffs had bitten. She didn't wince. Not with him beside her. Not anymore. The town of Helena lay quiet in the morning haze, the streets mostly empty save a few ranch hands leaning against a rail outside the livery. Valentine led them around back alleys and narrow crossings, avoiding the main thoroughfare until they reached a 2-story brick building with narrow windows and a sign faded by weather. Luther Hale's mercantile had once been a trading post. Now it sold everything from flour to shotgun shells, and Eleanor knew better than to think its back room didn't see more traffic than the front. Valentine dismounted and tied off the horses. He looked at her, not asking if she was sure, just waiting. "I want to do this myself," she said. He inclined his head once, then followed her through the front door. Inside, it smelled of burlap and tobacco. A man in a long vest and rolled shirt-sleeves stood behind the counter, sorting ledgers by candlelight. He looked up as they entered, blinking once before recognition settled in. "Grady," he said, voice tight. "Didn't expect you." Valentine rested one hand lightly on the counter. "We're not here long." Eleanor stepped forward. "I need to see the private registry." The clerk pursed his lips. "That's not open to." Valentine didn't move, but something in the way he stood shifted, and the man's mouth flattened. "I'll look," the clerk muttered, disappearing through the curtain behind the counter. When he returned, He carried a narrow book bound in cracked leather. He set it down between them and opened it to a marked page. Eleanor leaned in. Her name was there, written in looping script beneath a line of property claims and bounty commissions. Her breath caught. He listed me under livestock seizure. Valentine's jaw worked, but he said nothing. I'm not livestock, she said, eyes still fixed on the page. No, Valentine said, quiet but firm. You're not. She straightened. I want the page. The clerk hesitated. That's not. Valentine opened the knife at his belt and cut the page clean from the seam. He folded it once and handed it to her. Now it's yours, he said. Outside, the sun had burned through the overcast, painting long streaks of gold on the street. Eleanor tucked the page inside her coat and mounted up without a word. As they rode out toward the edge of town, a man stepped from the shade beneath the saloon's porch. Thomas Stark. He'd gained weight since she last saw him. His coat was finer, his boots new paid for, likely. With cattle no one asked him how he got. He didn't speak, just watched them pass. His eyes settled on her, cold and assessing. Eleanor didn't flinch. She kept her chin high and looked straight ahead. When they passed him, Valentine slowed his horse but didn't stop. You know she's mine, Stark called after them. Valentine reined in, just enough to speak without turning. She was never yours. They rode on. By midday, the hills rose up again, green and soft with spring. Eleanor relaxed her shoulders as the trees thickened. She reached up and undid the top button of her coat, letting the wind find her throat. Valentine didn't speak, but his gaze lingered when she brushed hair from her face. When they reached the cabin again, she dismounted and handed off the reins. I want to learn how to saddle them. He nodded. Start tomorrow. Inside, she unwrapped the page from her coat and laid it near the fire. She held it there until the edges curled, then fed it to the flames. Valentine watched from the table. You sure? She met his eyes. It never belonged to me. He just thought it did. Later, she stood outside with a tin basin, washing the dust from her arms. The sun had dipped low, and her skin gleamed where the water caught it. Valentine stepped from the cabin, wiping his hands on a rag. You ever think about leaving Montana? She asked. Sometimes. Why didn't you? Didn't have a reason to stay. Not till now. She turned then, fully, water dripping from her wrists. And now? I've got one. She stepped closer. What is it? He reached up, slowly, and touched the side of her face. She didn't pull away. His hand was warm, calloused, steady. You. She closed her eyes. I don't want to be alone anymore. You're not, he said. Not ever again. When she leaned into him, it wasn't sudden. It was the next right thing. And when he kissed her, it felt like the start of something that would last. The days warmed slow and sure, like a fire catching in damp wood. Snow still clung to the shadowed hills above the creek, but down in the valley, the earth had softened. Eleanor knelt in the garden bed behind the cabin, her skirts hitched above her knees, fingers sunk wrist-deep in dark soil. She planted slow onions, beans, a few hopeful potatoes from the winter store that had started to sprout. Valentine hammered fence posts along the western line, the steady rhythm of it drifting on the breeze. He hadn't offered to help with the planting, and she hadn't asked. They were learning each other's ways without needing to speak it. Looks like you've done this before, he said as he passed the garden, wiping his hands on his trousers. She sat back on her heels and squinted up at him. I haven't. But I watched my mother's hands enough times to remember the shape of it. He crouched beside her, brushing dirt from a sprout. You miss her? I do. Some memories come easier than others. Hers are the kind I hold on to. He didn't press. Just reached for the next seed and pushed it gently into the earth. You ever think about what it would have been like? She asked. If we'd met some other way? I think about what it means that we met this way, he said. And that you stayed. She looked at his hands, not delicate, not clean, but careful. You're nothing like the men I knew before. I'm not trying to be, he said. I just want to be enough. You already are. That night, he lit the lamp early and pulled a small wooden box from beneath the low shelf beside the hearth. She watched from the table, her needle paused halfway through a hem. I've something to show you, he said. The box held a pile of folded papers, worn soft with years. He set them in front of her without explanation. She unfolded the first one. A map hand-drawn, ink-faded, with markings in the margins and small X's near river crossings. I used to ride for a man who claimed half this land, he said. He sent us to clear it. We weren't always told what that meant until after. This map was his. I kept it because I needed to remind myself what I'd done. Eleanor set the paper down gently. It's not who you are now. No, he said, but it's part of who I was. I want you to know the full of it. She folded the map and set her hand over his. I don't need you to be clean, Valentine. I just need you to be honest. The next morning, he woke her before sunrise. Come with me, he said. I want to show you something. They rode out before the light touched the trees, their horses picking careful steps along a narrow ridge. After an hour, the trail opened into a clearing. A stand of aspens shimmered silver in the breeze, and beyond them, a small pond lay still and dark as slate. He dismounted and helped her down, then led her to a flat rock near the water's edge. I found this place the first month I lived here, he said. Didn't tell anyone about it. Just came here when I needed to think. She sat beside him, pulling her shawl tighter. Why bring me now? Because I want to build something here. A new cabin. Bigger. With a second room and space for more than just me. She turned to look at him, heart thudding. I want this land to mean something different from what it meant before, he said. And I want you to be part of that. She nodded slowly. Then we build it together. They rode back mid-morning, both quiet, but it was a quiet filled with purpose. The next days were spent clearing the brush, stacking stone for a foundation, sketching out where the walls would go. Eleanor worked beside him, sleeves rolled, hands blistered, but she never fell behind. One afternoon, as she hauled the beam into place, he caught her elbow and steadied it. You ever think about a family? He asked. I used to, she said. Then I stopped letting myself. You haven't stopped anymore. No, she said, meeting his eyes. I haven't. He kissed her then, not rushed, not uncertain, just steady, like he meant it to last. And when she kissed him back, something in both of them settled. Not into stillness, but into something rooted like seeds sown deep in warm earth, ready to take hold. The first wall of the new cabin rose beneath a sky the color of old linen. Eleanor pressed her shoulder into the timber frame, holding it steady while Valentine drove in the pegs with a mallet he'd carved from a pine stump. The scent of fresh cut wood hung thick in the warming air. The days had stretched long, the snow melt from the hills feeding the stream that ran just beyond the clearing. When the wall stood upright without shifting, she stepped back, brushing sawdust from her brow. You always this stubborn about doing things the hard way? He asked, setting the mallet down. I like knowing what my hands are capable of, she said. And I don't trust things I didn't help build. He nodded once, then went to check the alignment of the corner beam. She watched him crouch low, eyes narrowed as he measured by sight alone. There was something grounding in the way he moved, no wasted steps, no show of force. Just quiet knowing. They ate their mid-meal on the ground, bread and dried apples passed between them. The stump she sat on creaked beneath her, but she didn't mind. A breeze stirred the trees, and the rustle above them sounded like a hush spoken by the land itself. I had an older brother, she said. He died in the war. I never told you that. Valentine looked over, a piece of apple caught between his fingers. You close? He was always chasing something glory, maybe. He left when I was 12. Sent one letter. After that, we just stopped saying his name out loud. He didn't offer sympathy, only listened. When my parents died, I kept thinking he'd come back. That he'd heard somehow. But he didn't. You waited for him, Valentine said. A long time. Then I stopped waiting. But I never stopped wondering where he's buried. He nodded slowly. I never had family to lose. But I've buried enough men to know how it weighs. She folded her hands in her lap. It never leaves, but it changes shape. The sun shifted above the tree line, casting long shadows across their half-built home. She stood and brushed the crumbs from her skirt. Let's finish that beam, she said. By dusk, the skeleton of the cabin had taken shape, walls braced, floor joists laid, the hearthstone dragged into place. Valentine sat on the porch of the old cabin that night with a tin cup of coffee, watching the firelight flicker through the open door. Eleanor joined him, settling beside him on the step. You ever think about naming the place? She asked. He tilted his head. Never gave it much thought. She drew her knees up under her chin. Might be time. You've made something new here. He looked out toward the clearing. What would you call it? She paused. Haven. He nodded, then reached over and took her hand. Then that's what it'll be. The next morning brought a letter delivered by a boy on a mule, dust caked on his boots. Valentine took it at the fence and read it in silence before passing it to Eleanor. It bore the seal of the Helena Sheriff's Office. The page inside stated plainly that Thomas Stark had been charged with unlawful seizure and coercion. A witness, a ranch hand who'd left the Starks' spread after seeing Eleanor chained, had filed a sworn statement. Stark had forfeited his land rights in exchange for avoiding prosecution, and left for Wyoming Territory. She read the words twice, then folded the paper without expression. You feel anything? Valentine asked. Nothing worth naming, she said. He's gone. That's enough. They burned the letter in the hearth. She watched the flames take it, the edges curling in like dried leaves. That night, when she lay beside Valentine in the cot they now shared, she turned to him and said, I want to marry you. He didn't speak right away. Then he reached out and brushed his thumb across her cheek, slow and reverent. Then let's make it so. They rode into town 2 days later, hand in hand down the main road. The blacksmith's wife, who'd once refused Eleanor work, nodded to her from the millinery window. A quiet apology, not spoken, but understood. The preacher met them behind the chapel, where the lilacs had just started to bloom. It was a simple ceremony. No ring, but a promise spoken over joined hands and sealed with a kiss that made her heart still with its truth. Afterward they walked back through town with the light at their backs. No one jeered. No one questioned. She felt seen not as a possession or a poor girl with no people, but as a woman who had chosen her life. In the weeks that followed, the new cabin filled with the scent of fresh pine and open air. Eleanor hung curtains she'd stitched herself. Valentine carved a cradle from old barnwood and left it near the hearth, saying nothing, just letting it sit there until she was ready to speak of what might come. One evening, as they watched the sun slip behind the ridge, she leaned into him and said, I want children. He turned his head slowly. You sure? I am. I want to raise them where no one can tell them who they belong to. Only who they are. He nodded. Then we'll build that life together. The months passed. She planted a second garden. He brought her wild mint to hang in the windows. By the first frost, she carried new life beneath her heart, and he kissed her belly every night before sleep, whispering hopes he never said aloud. They never held on to the past longer than it demanded, but they honored it in the way they listened, in the way they held each other through the quiet. And when the child came a girl with dark hair and her mother's eyes, they named her Clara, after Eleanor's mother. The cabin stood strong through 5 winters. Then 10. Valentine taught Clara to ride. Eleanor taught her to sew, to read, to stand upright in the face of anything. They never left the land. There was nothing out there they wanted more than what they had built with their own hands. And in the quiet moments, when the fire burned low and the wind carried snow across the roof, Valentine would reach for Eleanor's hand, and she would lace her fingers with his. Not because they were trying to hold on, but because they already had everything they needed.